So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our event, Diversity in Newsroom Leadership, co-sponsored by NABJ-LA and AAJA-LA. I'm Erica Smith, a columnist with the Los Angeles Times, one of your moderators for tonight, along with Frank Buckley from KTLA 5 Morning News, as he just mentioned how early he gets up. We're pleased to be joined by two of LA's leading news executives. First, we have Kevin Merida, who is the executive editor of the Los Angeles Times. Before joining the Times in June, he was a senior vice president at ESPN and editor-in-chief of The Undefeated, a multimedia platform that explores the intersections of race, sports, and culture. We're also happy to have Pam Chen with us, who is the vice president of news at KABC-TV 7 in Los Angeles. Previously, she was an assistant news director and executive producer at the station. We're also looking forward to hearing from you, from those of you listening in who are commenting on our hot mics a few minutes ago. To submit questions, you can use the chat function as you've been using, or do the Q&A feature would be better for us, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Frank?
All right, thanks, Erica. Kevin and Pam, welcome to you. Welcome to those of you who are at home, and we hear that people are joining us as we speak. Our hope is to have a relaxed conversation like the one that you've been listening to already. We appreciate the fact that you've joined us when there's a wild card game going on. We have decided there will be no spoilers. We will not give the scores. We beg you not to get on the chat and tell us the scores. I'm recording the game, and I suspect some of you are as well. So let's all agree to that. As Erica mentioned, we want you to be part of the conversation, though, so you will have an opportunity to put forward your questions in the chat, and then we will try to get as many of those to our esteemed panelists as we can. Before we get to them, a couple of notes and numbers for background on diversity in newsroom leadership. A 2019 survey from the American Society of Newspaper Editors showed that 18.8% of print and online news managers are people of color. An RTNDA survey from 2019 indicated that 17.2% of news directors in TV news and 8.2% of news directors in radio are people of color. According to 2021 article by Joshua Benton, the founder of the Neiman Lab, nearly 2/3 of the nation's 20 biggest dailies are now run by a woman or a person of color. So with that as background, let's get to our guests. We thought we'd start the evening, Kevin and Pam, by asking each of you to share your personal stories. And Pam, we'll start with you first. What was your path to leadership, and what, if any, roadblocks or bumps in the road did you encounter along the way?
Thank you for that. First, I want to say how honored I am to be part of this panel. Kevin, I read that feature on you in LA Magazine this weekend. Honestly, if it was just Kevin and Frank and Erica on this panel, I would log in and watch. So thank you to AAJA-LA and NABJ-LA for including me. So my story of coming up through the ranks, I've been the news director here at ABC7 for just over a year. I've been at ABC7 for 16 years, starting as one of the morning producers. Before that, I was briefly at KTLA, I think before your time, Frank. Before that, KFMB in San Diego, and then before that, Colo in Reno, Nevada. So it's actually a fairly traditional pattern for working your way up in local TV markets, right? I think a lot of people who are on this call are probably journalists or who understand how it works. It's all by market size. New York is number 1, LA is number 2, and on down 200+ markets. So typically you have to start small. I think Reno was market 108 when I was there. I think it's a little bit bigger now. San Diego was a great medium-sized market, and then LA. So the goal for me was always to get back to LA. I was born and raised here. My family was all here. It was a dream to come back. I came up through the ranks as a producer in all of those markets. So I didn't get into management until I got to be an executive producer here at ABC7. One of the kind of things I thought about as I'm thinking back on my career, you know, when I started in this business, like a lot of people who saw only on-camera jobs, when I'm talking about television, I thought I wanted to be a reporter. Then after internships and shadowing various roles, I realized I'm not cut out to be on camera. So instead, I shadowed a producer and thought, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. It was honestly the perfect job for me, for people who are a little control freaks, a little OCD, very organized, time conscious. I like writing. I like showcasing stories. I like building the show. And also, I think one of the things I want to say, and also people for people who want to have an influence. You know, I know lots of people want to be on air, and that's great, but truly, the way to drive coverage is behind the scenes. I mentor and talk to a lot of young journalists and students, and I always have a special place in my heart for those who want to be producers, not just because I can help them through my own experience, but also because I think they really can make a difference in this business. As for personal hurdles, I would say the first time I applied for a job here at ABC7, I didn't get it. So, but I persisted. So.
Thank you, Pam. Kevin, we'll ask you the same question. Your path to leadership, and what, if any, bumps did you encounter along the way?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like Pam, I'm glad to be here. Hey, with you, Frank, and Erica, my colleague at the LA Times, and Pam, and great meeting you, and sharing this with you, this stage with you. I think that I look at leadership as not needing a position, and I know one of the things when I was managing editor, was named managing editor at the Washington Post, and I was looking across. We always have these ceremonies, in newsrooms, and something happened, and I was announced in the newsroom, and I looked around the newsroom, and I saw these people. I've been working at the Washington Post for a long time, many years, and you could see pockets of influence. I saw leaders everywhere. They are people who have influence in your newsroom, and people that other people follow. And like, there's Dan Balls, who's the greatest political reporter ever, and so many political reporters follow him. So, I looked at people, so I want people to lead from where they are, and I think it's important in organizations not to look to, anybody to be Moses or a savior. No one's going to save, not one person's going to save you. It takes all of us, and you don't need a title. And so I came to my career really wanting to be an investigative reporter. That's the path I started because one of my mentors, Les Payne, the late Les Payne, wrote a tremendous book, just won a Pulitzer Prize, The Dead Are Rising, on about Malcolm X. But he was one of my early mentors, and also was I came into journalism school after Watergate and Woodward and Bernstein, so that was on my mind. And my early years were really spent trying to investigate and do that kind of reporting. Later in life, I accidentally got into political writing because I got an opportunity to do that at the Dallas Morning News. So I went to the Milwaukee Journal. I went to the Dallas Morning News. I spent probably the bulk of the largest stretch as a political writer in local, state, national, covering campaigns, covering the White House, covering Congress. But then I did get into kind of long form feature writing. So there was a stint where I really saw myself as a writer, and I really embraced it. And I still think of myself as a writer in my soul. And so, but over time, those are positions and jobs, but I hope that I was leading in different places. I cared about things. I cared about the topic that we're talking about, diversity and inclusion and representation. And I was always trying to, leading even without the title. I will say I'm kind of, I would put my foot into it, and I was an editor here, an editor there, and then I'd take my foot out. I was trying to get back to my writing. And so I had some reticence about getting all the way in, and I got a lot of people pulling me in. And I think finally the turn was after the 2008 presidential campaign, elected the first African-American president. I actually was thinking that after that, I would probably try to build a body of work at the Washington Post about this historic presidency, but I was asked by a new editor to be national editor. And that was the first struggle. And so I decided to take it, and I was national editor, and I thought I would go back, and return to writing, and I'd do my stint there, and I come back to writing. But then one editor left the Washington Post, and another editor came. His name was Marty Barron. He asked me to be managing editor, and then that. And so then I was really steep inside as executive leadership, and that led to me going to ESPN and ultimately launching the Undefeated and doing, overseeing, getting into the television side of things like you all, and overseeing some shows like Outside the Lines and East 60 and Investigative Group and launching the startup inside of Disney. And really, once you start, you're brought in, you're in, right? And things open up for you too. It's like intellectually, what it's like to run things and to be in rooms and making the final decisions. But until you're really doing it, you really don't know what it's like, right? Like, Pam could probably talk, it's both the loneliness, the sometimes you making difficult decisions, but you also recognize that when it comes to this subject, it's everything. It's the ability to give people opportunity and shape in your industry. It's really literally everything, because if we're not diverse in these spaces where the final decisions are being made or close to them, we're really not changing the industry. And so for me, there was a realization I could have this idea and I could go into the offices myself. I had influence, I was a leader of a kind, but until you have the position and the mantle and the responsibility on your job title, it's a difference. And that was really a kind of awakening for me, and so, yeah, the hurdles are, there are always hurdles and challenges and things of getting into it. To me, a lot of my hurdle was one of me making that decision to do it, right? And the importance of it. And now I'm trying to pull other people into it. I'm trying to tell people, look, if you have even an inkling that you want to lead and this to do, come on in, because the industry needs you.
Actually, Kevin, I'm going to piggyback on something you just talked about, as far as being in leadership and diversity and inclusion and changing the industry. I want to ask both of you, maybe Pam, you could start, why is it so important to have diversity at the highest ranks of newsrooms, not just in leadership positions, but in title specifically?
I think I love what Kevin said about how you don't need the title to be a leader, right? Everybody has the option to find moments where they can be leaders. At ABC-7, I think, I benefited from the legacy of Cheryl Fair, and those who know LA TV News know who she is. She was the longtime news director here. Now she's the president and general manager. And she didn't just start prioritizing diversity in the last couple of years, right? It's always been a priority. And I think my job is to kind of continue prioritizing that, right? So you see it on air. David Ono, he says, hi, Frank. He celebrated his 25th anniversary here last week. Mark Brown.
He didn't just say hi, by the way. I'm sure there's some
he was a little disappointed he's not taking
comments
part.
that came with it. Okay, hi back.
Mark Brown's been here for 30 plus, Rob Fukuzaki for 25 plus, but us behind the scenes, Cheryl's current management team, including myself, a very diverse group. And I think, but it's not just us, right? It's also the writers, the assignment desks, the digital team, the editors. Like what Kevin said, I think you really can find leaders all over, producers who decide what stories that go in a show, reporters who tell the stories and ask certain questions. To the experienced photographer who knows the best way to handle a situation in the field. We need everybody to kind of, find those moments to be leaders, not just the people with the title. People with the title know that that's what they have to do, right? And I think, making sure there is diversity in leadership, it's an ongoing process. It's about having different perspectives, different people at the table, hearing different voices. And I think I approached it not just looking at obviously hey, bringing in new people to diversify our team, but also, as we know, news is a 24/7 operation, right? So Frank knows this for sure, right? So we have morning shifts, we have dayside shifts, we have night side, we have weekends, we have weekend mornings, right? You need to have leaders in all of those day parts, not just me when I'm here, not just, so-and-so when they're here. So I think about, our upper management team in this newsroom, and we are diverse in race and ethnicity, but also in gender, perspective, experience in the business, personal backgrounds. And I think that is so important because, we're serving an audience that is one of the most diverse in the world. And we have to, it's like, without question, it's important to reflect that so you can better deliver for that audience.
Well, everything Pam said, I agree with. It's also about empowerment and opportunity. Those are the most things. It's not, there are a lot of talented people, and the difference between sometimes people excelling and really reaching their full potential is just a question of opportunity. Who's going to give it? And I think that's like who, someone's got to name Erica Smith a Collins. And someone's got to find the next Erica Smith, and so, man, I think I need some light on in my house here. There it is. Boom, magic. So I think diversity is just like, you need different perspectives, different outlooks. How you see people, and the more diverse the upper ranks are, where the opportunities can be had, then someone had to let Wes Lowry send him down to Ferguson. It started a whole change in his career trajectory. Krista Thompson is a managing editor at the Washington Post, was first sent down as to be a de facto bureau chief down there. Someone had to do that. Soraya McDonald, who is one of the finest culture critics, she was working in IT at the Washington Post. So somebody had to get, you have to give people opportunity in places. And I think that is one of the biggest things about diversity, is like, who gets seen and who doesn't get seen. Bring visibility to people that may not get that visibility. And as Pam said, the other thing is, we're in the news business, so there's an external part of it too. Like who gets covered, whose stories get told. And how do they get told?
It's interesting. It sounds so organic in terms of listening to your careers. You both, in a way, it's the classic success story. You worked your asses off. You had mentors. You got opportunities. That's the way it's supposed to work. But it doesn't always work that way. And I always wonder about structure. Should there be some sort of structure in place so that young reporter or young producer who wants to be you someday knows, here is that path, here is that mentor program, or that thing that I should do to get recognized? So Kevin, I'll start with you. How would you do that? Do you have structures and processes in place like that at the Times? And what are best practices in that regard?
Well, you asked a great question, Frank. I mean, and that's the thing about being in charge. You can do things like that. You just outline with the opportunity. I mean, I think this happened before us. We have, Angel Jennings, who's over talent and culture, which is a great title. She's the assistant managing editor of talent and culture. That means a lot. It's not just simply, what were often newsroom personnel jobs. It's really looking at things that are really important, like how do we develop talent, and what kind of culture are we going to have inside of a place? How are we going to belong to each other and operate in the world, and and make each other accountable and be the best that we can be, and include all of us. And so that's not all on her, but it's part of the kind of things we would do. And I think there are lots of things you can do, both in collecting together, but also, we've talked about doing a kind of in-house in-house university where we draw on the talents of each other, which I think sometimes we take for granted in the newsroom. There's a lot of talent of all kinds. We certainly send people to conferences and programs and actively look for ways to get people the kind of opportunity sometimes to be with other leaders in the places that might be in the similar situation, because sometimes you can get a sense of your own possibility by looking at from other places, and you come back and bring that, and you're all fired up at your place. So those are some of the things that we're doing and thinking about. But over to you, Pam.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned like the LATU. We actually here, so we call ourselves, we're a Disney-owned ABC station. There's 8 Disney-owned stations. So New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Philly. There's 8 stations total, and we call ourselves kind of small but mighty. I know some station groups like Nexstar, which owns KABC-LA, has I think almost 200 stations. So we're small in context, but I think we're big stations in big markets. So what we do is we partner together, right? So collaboratively, we can do better. So we call ourselves ABC owned television stations, right? So it's OTVU is what we created, OTV University, literally that. And we started this last year, and it's courses taught by, our top people, executive producers, experienced photographers, digital, managers, and we're trying to upskill everybody, right? So if you were only ever doing one thing, well, now you can learn something else. And it might be something you like better. It might be something you are better at. And I think the point of it is to share our expertise with each other. And, we've trained reporters to shoot and edit. We've trained, writers to build graphics and edit. There's any number of things that we've been doing as part of OTVU. And I think that it's also helped us recognize, better spaces for people, sometimes giving opportunities for people to do other things. Frank, like news can be a daily grind, TV news, right? We produce almost 60 hours of news. You produce like even more than that. It can be a grind, and sometimes when you're the reporter in the field or the writer, at their desk, nonstop, don't even have time to like get up and get lunch, barely to go to the bathroom. It's kind of like, what else can you do? And that's kind of sort of the idea behind it, is to give opportunity for people to learn something else. And even if it doesn't necessarily lead to a job, well, you got trained to do something. We, the company, have invested time for you to learn something. And I think it's been a really positive experience for people across the board. So
that's really interesting. I imagine that goes a lot to retaining employees that you have. And, I know that we at the Times have been talking a lot about, expanding our staff's diversity, particularly since last year. And I think I would venture to say most people on this call probably understand the need to diversify newsrooms, but there's also been this, real challenge in getting candidates to do it. Just, I think everybody's in search of now of, diverse candidates and recruiting people. So can you both talk a little bit about the challenges maybe of getting people in the door? Are you finding there's challenges in recruiting more diverse employees, or are you finding the people that you need, or what do you want to talk about? I don't know, Kevin, you want to start? Pam?
Look, I know that there are often, a lot jobs open, and sometimes they may take a while to get filled. Sometimes people say that, but I think there's a world of talent. There's so much talent out there, and it ought to be like Christmas when you have a job opening, because there's no shortage of talent. And I've never found it difficult to find anybody. Never had that problem. I had the opposite problem. trying to create jobs for people who are talented and trying to get them, but never had a problem finding people. Part of it is just you have to open up, and I think open up your mind to who qualifies. I mean, everybody had to have that first opportunity to do something. You weren't born a White House correspondent. Nobody was born a national security reporter. No one was born a columnist. Somebody had to do, whenever you did it, it was the first time you did it at some point. And so I don't know that every time you have a job, you have to have X number of years of experience doing the job. Sometimes you just need to have some requisite experience that may make you like an anthropologist and a curiosity seeker, and a great reporter, a great writer, a great thinker, to do a particular kind of job. And I think sometimes we box ourselves in when we think about jobs because we want equivalent experience, for the job, when I don't know that you always have to have that. We also have many more. We work for what is traditionally called a newspaper, and I know, Pam, what's traditionally called a television station, but we're all in the digital world now. We're all digital. Everybody's digital. It's a digital environment. So there is journalism being committed everywhere and of the same kind. People, television doesn't have not cornered the market on video, right? And visual storytelling, and newspapers the same way with the print, where we're doing some of everything. And so there's a lot of talent. The pool has grown, actually. It hasn't shrunk, it's grown. And so you can go other places and find people to come work for you. You can go to tech companies. You can go to television stations to have them come work for newspapers, and vice versa. You can go to movie houses, the digital platforms. You can get talent from everywhere. And so I tell people, be creative about it. You don't see who you want, go look someplace else.
I would say, first I want to call out Jessica Dominguez in the chat. She's one of our programming producers who went through OTVU, or OTVU University. And she says that, it's been incredible for her professional growth. And I just think about, she was the programming producer for years, and now she shoots, she edits, she publishes, she does tons for digital and social. And it's just and that was all trained. She's been an internal person that's been trained to do so many other things, to truly be multi-skilled. And it's such kind of a gratifying success story. On the other topic of hiring, I would say sometimes it's also about not being afraid to start over. I was looking for a senior level manager for the newsroom, and Disney Recruiting sent me candidates, OTV Talent Development sent me candidates. I met people at NAHJ, NABJ, AAJA. I got recommendations from NLG-JA. I reached out to people on my own through various means. I had my team of managers help interview people. I had our GM and president interview 2 finalists, and there was pressure on me to make a decision. But I just didn't feel like I was there. So I started over, and it was a really difficult decision to make, but I did, because I didn't know, I had good people, but it was like, I just felt like I wasn't there. And it took longer than I hoped, but I was committed to getting the right candidate on all fronts. And I think that that's like a message I have to tell myself, don't pressure yourself into feeling it just because you really want the best people, and it may not be a traditional candidate. You have to kind of, for lack of a better term, think outside of the box sometimes. So.
Well, let me
can I just
ahead,
add one other thing? It was something that Pam said that made me think of something else, which is, and she's right. Sometimes you start over. The other thing I was thinking is that we are sometimes, really risk averse when it comes to that. We treat these job opportunities like, wow, we can't take a chance on anybody. And I think we need to take more chances. You sometimes have to hire for potential and be willing to take a chance on somebody. And it's also, it carries over because it changes how people think about hiring. When they see you bring in somebody that you're not supposed to, that maybe look a little it empowers others to do the same, you know, and I think we should be less risk averse.
Well, let me pick up on that thread. And Pam, I'm going to go back to you in that moment when you had to decide amongst all of this talent pool to make a hire, and you chose to start over. But when you are at that moment and you have, let's say it's down to 2 candidates, one is a person of color and one is a majority person, for lack of a better way, a white person, let's say, for lack of a better way of describing it. And you believe they're of equal talent. Does it ever come to that where it's that decision? And if it does, how important is that idea of diversity, and how do you factor that in and be fair to both people? Now, and Pam, I'll start with you, but Kevin, I'd like you to take it on as well.
I think it's not something that I don't think about until the very end, you know, so it's like you have to look at the whole picture from the beginning. And so kind of giving that as a example, right? Choose one or the other. I don't feel like, you know, you would get to that point because it's not just about, it's never just about one thing, right? And I don't want us to kind of be victims of progress a little bit, you know. I think ultimately we want the best people for the job, and we need to prioritize diversity, yes, but and I don't think anybody wants to hire or be hired just because of that. I don't think that, you know, and I don't think any of us are advocating for that, or, you know, because we support diversity, that's not what we're saying. You know, ultimately you want the best person. So those 2 people who made it to the final, they're both qualified, and that's why they got there. You know, so I think that it wouldn't get to the point where you would have to do that, because it's a process. It's not just like a one-off thing. It's not just like check mark this one box, okay, you get the job or you don't. I think it's like a holistic view and process. So.
Yeah, hiring is very complex, right? There's so many dimensions and so many factors that go into it. You know, I do think about diversity. You have to be intentional about it, you know, if you're going to make improvement. And usually in that area, the norm is that most companies are behind there. They're failing in that area. You know, they're not as good as they would like to be. And I don't attach bad intentions to every company that's not meeting goals, but they're not intentional enough. It hasn't reached a level in their value system structure that it's at the very top. And so if you don't have it that way, you can always find yourself in these situations where you're in a hiring meeting and everybody goes around and they've had candidates and diverse, but here's this person that the white person rises a little bit better, and you go along and say, well, we had these candidates of color, but we didn't hire any of them. So we're not any better by the fact that we brought a lot of candidates of color in. It was like the Rooney Rule, you know, in football, you know, and they have a rule. You have to have candidates of color for coaching, and you go through and people bring them through and they interview them. But if they don't get the job, you're not any better. And so I think the aim of companies is to get better, you know, and do both things, which are possible to hire the best candidate, to hire top flight candidates, and also increase your diversity. But it just tends to work out. This is just my experience. What I've observed is that if you're not intentional, it doesn't work out. I work with a lot of really well-intentioned managers and leaders, people that I adore, people who are my friends, but somehow they didn't get the job done, right? Like you didn't get those people. And so if you're not really focused on it, you don't really get to where you need to be. And it doesn't change about like what you say, Frank, about hiring people of all kinds, including white men, you know, white women. I've hired my share and proud and tremendous, you know, and so I think it's just that we've reached a point in our business, and particularly at certain positions, certain levels, where we just haven't been able to break through there. And I don't know how many times we can say, well, we tried, and not succeeded. It's just some point you just to say it's not good enough to have tried.
So once you get, these diverse candidates in the door, you retain the ones that you have. There's been a lot of diversity, but when you talk about inclusion, how do you actually move that a little bit further, as you were saying, Kevin, kind of being intentional when it comes to expanding what we cover? Is that something that you both think about, and in what ways has that played out in your newsroom? Pam, you want to start, then switch to Kevin?
Yeah, I think I was trying to think of like some specific examples versus just kind of saying we do that and we've expanded our coverage. I think, since George Floyd, for sure, right? We are committed to doing our best so that we are not telling these same stories decades from now. And one of the things, at least our group has done, we followed the lead of ABC News. So ABC OTV, we launched a race and culture unit. And that was last year. In the middle of the pandemic, we launched a brand new team that included a dedicated reporter at every station, plus 2 executive producers. And in the process of interviewing for those EP positions, there were such strong candidates that we actually increased that EP number to 3. So 3 managers of color dedicated and committed to telling diverse and inclusive stories. And I think, in just the 1 year, has it been 1 year? About 1 year that they've existed, it's helped us create so much compelling content for all our stations, not just in the day-to-day. Our race and culture reporter, Annabelle Munoz, has told so many great hyper local stories. Instead of like chasing the news of the day, she gets to sit down and kind of do a little bit more long form. But it's like we had to invest in her to do that, invest her time to be able to do that. One of the series that the group produced is called Our America, and we've explored everything from the lived Black experience to elevating AAPI voices, to pride, to women's rights, to our latest one that launched for Hispanic Heritage Month called Todos Unidos. And it's really wonderful. And it's stuff that we never taken not that we weren't able to do it, but taken and committed the time to do it. So I think it's kind of transformed our news creation, our content creation, platform in a way that gives more space to telling those kinds of stories. So again, it's not about just saying diversity is important, right? I think our station and group really commits to that importance and making sure it's not just like a one-off thing. This is truly an ongoing effort. These aren't like contract positions. These are all staff positions. This is an investment in, saying that we're going to commit to this kind of storytelling.
When the leaders of news organizations like yours are people of color, does that affect the ability for people in the community to affect coverage? And to that end, have business and community leaders from affinity communities reached out to you to see if there will be more coverage of ethnic communities in LA due to your role at the Times and at KABC? Pam, you sort of touched on that, but Kevin, if you could talk to us about that. Your appointment was a big deal at the LA Times, and I was just wondering the community reaction to that, and what are the questions they have for you in communities of people of color?
Well, no, thanks for that, Frank. I mean, I still feel like I'm new here. I've been here since July in LA. I have have met with people, and people have reached out to me, and I met with a group of Latino leaders, took some tour, had lunch. This is an interesting thing. I don't know. The person said this is the first executive editor. I don't know if that's, I found it hard to believe it had actually come to visit him in his neighborhood. And he said that that was important to come to him. And to me, it was natural. I'm here to learn, you know, I'm trying to go to communities and as much as you can in COVID. And that has been a little bit of a holdback, because I would be doing a lot more if it weren't for COVID. Probably all would be, but yeah, I'm eager to meet. You know, met with a group of really attorneys, civil rights lawyers, and others who've really been involved in a lot of the civil rights cases and police and otherwise here. And mostly I'm always in listening mode. I tell people that my door's open, right? My phone's open, my email's open. I'm gonna be accessible to people, listen to people, learn. And I think, like in most communities, wherever you go, you have where you know, people have a history of coverage and an experience that they have had with your news organization, right? And they have their stories, and all I can do is, you know, absorb that, you know, read, go back and do some reading, learn from that. But to say this is where we are now, I can start from this point on, and I do think it's important to listen and be responsible. I think the best thing we can do is news leaders and organizations to try to be transparent about what we do. And when people have complaints or critiques, that we look at those and turn the lens on ourselves and see where we can improve and how good we are, and then communicate that to people where we do make changes. And I think we are in this age where people want more transparency, and I think that is deserved.
Yeah, I would also say, you know, COVID has certainly affected our ability to meet in person, but not from Zoom meetings, lots of Zoom meetings. Our head of community affairs is Teresa Samaniego, and she's a force to be reckoned with in this city, in this area. And so many people and nonprofits and businesses and community groups in our area know her really well. You know, partly because of her, we've been so committed to covering diverse communities for years and years. And, you know, we've had, you know, ABC7 covers normally the East LA Mexican Independence Day Parade, the MLK Parade. So we've had meetings with those groups as we're trying to navigate this pandemic and talk about, okay, there's no parade this year. What else? You know, it doesn't mean that because there's no parade, then we're not going to do a story anymore. You know what I mean? We're committed to that kind of storytelling. We're committed to representing those communities. So what else can we do? And I think it's been fairly successful, and we found ways to be creative with that. And I would say the other thing is, you know, Kevin and I are not the only, you know, media executives in this market who are persons of color, you know. And so, you know, Julie Chin is the news director at KNX, and she reached out to me, and we still have to go to lunch, but, you know, I think that I'm 1 year into this job officially, and I'm always learning and always trying to improve. I've leaned on Cheryl Fair so much and the other, you know, amazing leaders at our own station. But I don't have the be all end all answer to everything. I think it's an ongoing effort of always, you know, being open, being transparent, as Kevin says, and just trying to do better.
You know, as you mentioned, Pam, you're, you know, new to your job, and obviously, Kevin, you're new to LA. You know, people have lots of feelings about media outlets, you know, good and bad in the city and in this county. How do you see, you know, piggybacking on the idea that you're not the only people of color in charge of media organizations in town, you know, how do you see media, just coverage of this community changing over the next, say, 10 years, with more diversity in some of our long-term institutions, both TV and print and broader media outlets, and just more interest in covering diverse communities? Kevin, do you want to start?
You know, one thing that I think, and it's been an issue that this is not a new topic, but I think that news organizations often sometimes go too much to the way we cover Latino communities or Asian communities or Black communities is to take the Black in them or the Asian and then zero in on that, right? Like our lives are only circling around, you know, what is Asian about us or Black about us to the larger outside world or Latino about us. Whereas as opposed to, you know, we're mothers and raising families and all of those issues that might happen in everyday life. You know, the stories that are about our rise in our professions, you know, our and certainly our struggles, but our everydayness. And I think sometimes that misses that's its own kind of invisibility when you don't see people for who they are as individuals, but part of a community that has already been defined in some larger sense. And that's a mistake. You know, I think that we'll see more coverage. I mean, one of the things, just by demographics of the increasing growth of our community, the migrant, you know, the immigrant patterns, that we're getting more diverse, and that should be reflected in the storytelling. You know, we have I think a plurality yet of the police department's Latino, right? Officer Street, that's its own story, right? And it's and I know we've told it, but we see ourselves. I think we want to see ourselves reflected in everything, not just one thing. And I think that's where coverage needs to go more and more. And while, of course, the richness of culture and music and lived experience, but also individual experience.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of that. I think back to, you know, early in the year when all the anti-Asian hate stories were, you know, dominating the headlines, and people were really like looking to David a lot for guidance on things and reaction to things. And yes, I'm Asian American, but I don't represent all of Asia America. You know, I can't speak for everybody. It's not a monolithic, you know, population. And so I think, like what Kevin said, right? Like minimizing it into, oh, well, you're Asian, so you must have a reaction to this story, or you must be somehow connected to it, or you're Black, so you must have some connection to this story, I think is not the point. You know, that's not what we're trying to do. I think the other part in more inclusive coverage and expanding coverage, I think, is really bringing more people to the table, even if it's virtual, right? I remember when I was a producer way back when, you know, the morning editorial meeting was a handful of people sitting around a conference table that would basically decide the whole day. So one of the positives is certainly, and I'm sure other people can attest to this, that has come out of the pandemic, is Zoom has made these meetings so much more accessible. Yes, it's a pain to log into another Zoom meeting, but we have dozens of people every morning participating, you know, so you hear from multiple different departments and people, more people can have a say, the communication is improved in that way, and then more people have a voice. And so just naturally, you're going to get more stories, you're going to get more perspectives on any number of things. So
leave it to Pam to make that a positive, to have all those people in on a meeting at the same time. Let me just say that we only have a few minutes left, and we haven't really included any of the questions. We know that many of you are watching. I haven't seen any questions pop up that we haven't addressed yet. But if you want to get in a question, please put one into the chat for us, and we'll add that. I want to ask you about, both of you, about this idea of majority men, i.e. white men. A 2017 survey from Ernst & Young confirmed what many corporate diversity experts believe, that white males feel left out when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and that affects progress in those areas. 35% of them felt that the increased conversations about diversity tend to overlook white males. Of the 35% who shared that belief, half of them felt that white men were excluded from diversity programs, and a quarter of them believed that white men are not included in mentorship or training programs. So the question is, how important is it to get white males involved in diversity and inclusion efforts, especially if some believe, rightly or wrongly, that those efforts come at their expense? And do they come at their expense? Who wants to take that one first?
I mean, I think I have a fairly shortish answer to it since we're limited on time. I think it's important for everyone to be a part of this process. And you can't change things if you don't include everyone, right? And there are white male managers here at ABC7 who are valuable and skilled and experienced, who work their tails off and are so passionate and committed to what we do and are absolutely phenomenal at their jobs. But they're also involved in, we have a ABC7 Belong group, which is like a diversity and inclusion group, and in our company-wide training sessions. And I think I said it before about, like, I don't know where I read it, but that victims of progress, right? We can't let people be victims of progress. They can and are being agents of change and supporters and facilitators, and doing so should not come at their expense, but I think they have to be committed to that, right? So you can't say, well, if I do that, then I'm gonna not get a job or I'll lose my job. I think that's not the right mentality. It has to be like everybody is responsible for this. Everybody has to take part. And if we're going to change, that's the only way to do it.
I think, I can't say much more than what Pam said. I think we had this period after George Floyd's murder, particularly, that a lot of companies, I happened to be in the Walt Disney Company then, and, having, uncomfortable conversations, or whatever we were calling them. And there are lots of those discussions, and some of them were really eye-opening, and there was a lot of reticence for some people to speak. And I think it reinforced something that should last beyond in the post-Floyd years, is that we have to find ways to bring people together, and to have the kind of conversations that are reflective of our business, right? We're in a business, we ask people everything. We have to go to people's houses after they've lost their children and ask them questions. We have to figure out where our approach is. And, there's a lot that we're skilled at, and sometimes not as skilled at looking at ourselves, right? And I think, it's, just as you asked that question, I'm thinking, like, we have to find ways to coax the conversation out for people to be able to respect one another, but be able to speak their honest truths. And I think that's part of what would help us all. I mean, I think we need everybody. There's nobody should be left behind. We need everybody, because the talent is everywhere. And so we ought to be able to coexist, in a company, in a newsroom, all of us, and be great together.
We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A that apparently we ignored. Sorry, everybody. I'm going to ask one. Kevin, this one's for you. Throughout your career as a Black journalist, did you ever feel as if you had to shoulder extra weight in order to push inclusivity in the newsroom? And if so, how did you go through that without burning out?
I mean, yeah, it was a drag, to be honest. Sometimes it just, it's just, man, just fatiguing, and, I just mentioned post George Floyd, it was really for a lot of Black journalists, and maybe others. I mean, I was there and I was the executive. It was just wearying, just like you're constantly having to have these conversations, and sometimes you just feel like you have too many conversations. But I think about it like this: whenever you feel like there's some kind of burden, or you're feeling stressed and stuff, just, man, think about Thurgood Marshall. He's going down fighting to break the back of Jim Crow and people got to smuggle them in so you can go to the courtroom, going into all white courtrooms, challenging laws, and then trying to get out of town and not get killed. You know, there were Black journalists who were covering the Emmett Till trial, covering civil rights movement. They couldn't eat in restaurants, couldn't stay places, you know, couldn't get food when they needed, you know. And so, man, when we talk about our present day troubles, getting trolled on Twitter, or, you know, I'm sitting here on a Zoom thing, whatever I had to do during my career, you know, it pales to that, and I owe that. So, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, it a burden, but like keep that on the sense that you're part of something to make it better. So whoever comes after me, they have it better.
Okay, Pam, here's a question for you. Do staff get paid to go to OTVU, that upskill training that you talked about? Is it during work hours or is it an after hours thing? And then I'll ask a combo question. Transition to reporting, to editing roles. And this is sort of to both of you. What is the advice you would give as you transition? But Pam, if you could first just quickly answer, people get paid when they're going on?
Yeah, it's scheduled during regular work hours, regular work days. So you get, you know, pulled from your regular shift so that you can attend OTVU, or you get hired. You know, we have freelancers that do it too, and you'll get hired for those days to go to OTVU. And then I asked the second part of the question again.
Yeah, so the second question is really just a different question, but this idea of transitioning. This person is already a reporter, maybe wants to go into editing, and this is something that I think you could both take on. If you could just sort of give them some general advice about that, what should be the first thing they would do if they want to take that leap?
Communicate that with us, you know, so that we can, you know, make those opportunities. You know, speaking of specifically reporting and editing, you know, I have veteran reporters who've worked here for a very long time who went through those trainings. And, you know, everybody's at different levels of learning kind of new stuff. But I think, you know, for the most part, it's like, if you want to be in this business, especially I think TV, you have to keep wanting to learn new things. We can't do things the same way that we've done them for 50 years, you know, not just the storytelling part, but the technical part. You know, for producers, you know, our computer operating system has changed, you know, a handful of times in the time that I've been here. Is it disruptive to the work because it's not the way we've always done it? But, you know, technology advances, and you have to keep going. You have to upskill. You have to learn new things, and it's not easy, but we have to do it. You know, so, and I think that what the company is doing to ensure that that's successful is investing time and training and support so that people will succeed in that.
And the second half of that person's question is that they're suggesting that you have to know how to plan and budget large scale productions and that sort of thing. When you both got into this and started moving up into things like management, I wouldn't know the first thing about how to budget or how to hire people or any of that stuff that you guys do all the time. Do you just learn that as you go, or do you have to learn that somewhere else and then bring it, or how does that happen?
I mean, for me, I have a very easy answer to that. I lean on the people who know how to do it and who have done it before me, you know. So we have our head of finance is brilliant, and he's a news guy and he knows numbers. So guess what? I'm calling him constantly with stupid questions, you know, but I'm learning along the way.
Yeah, look, we're all in the learning business. I'm still learning. You know, you don't know everything. You don't stop learning, and whoever can help you. Yeah, you being humble, you know, humility is a good trait, you know, like you don't know everything, you try to find out, you know, people are generally, you know, eager to help you. And you know, I oversaw television shows like award-winning Emmy I don't know anything about television, you know, not much, you know, I've never done a show. So like I have to come in there humble, I have some leadership and you're just learning stuff, so yeah, finance has always been about, never good at math. So budgets, all of those things are, the budget spreadsheets, reading them, understanding them, you having to learn all that kind of stuff. But whatever you learn makes you better.
Erica, we're kind of at the end. Do you want to get in another question or should we wrap it up?
I don't know. Do you guys have it in you for one more question? All right. This one just came in through the chat. This is to both of you, what was your motivation to overcome adversity to succeed in journalism? Pam, start with you, then Kevin.
What was everyone's motivation to overcome adversity to succeed in journalism? I don't know if I have a good answer to this. I think just like personal, I'm a very hardworking person. I'm very committed to what I do. I don't half-ass things, I take what I do really seriously. I respect and value my coworkers. I always say, people say, "Oh, you work so hard, Pam." I don't do it to elevate myself. I do it for my coworkers because they count on me. So I think that's a big motivation for me on the day-to-day, I would say.
Well, look, I'll say this, so because if I don't say it, I try not to cry and give an answer, but like my dad died young when I was a teenager, so he didn't get to see me as an adult. And I went to college and see anything in my journalism career. So that definitely fueled me. And he had come into a profession that where there were not many Black men, tried to break through, and I saw his struggles to get into geology, paleontology, just because of his love of rocks as a Black man back in the 50s, right? Go to school. So that was always in the back of my mind. And that's just a personal example, but it's also part of what, when I was talking about Thurgood Marshall and others that came before us, that sense of history and struggle and what people did before we got here is always a motivator for me.
Well, if we had an audience in front of us at this point, I would ask them to all thank you very much, and there would be a standing ovation. And I'm sure folks who are watching right now are doing that. We are grateful to have people at your level to speak to all of us and to spend as much time as you have. So we thank you both for your inspirational stories and for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. You all were great as usual, like top of your craft, Erica and Frank. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And Erica, thank you very much. You're a terrific co-moderator. I appreciated you. Thank you so much.
I think triviable plug, right?
We also want to invite everyone to join AAJA-LA's Trivia Bowl. That's the signature annual fundraising event that will take place virtually this year on Friday, October 15th, in our milestone 40th anniversary year. Proceeds fund our student internships, fellowships, and reporting grants, along with student and professional workshops throughout the year. I was the recipient of the AAJA scholarship, so I'm always keen to help AAJA in any way that I can, even if David Ono is the moderator of that event and annoys us all every year, but it is worth attending, even if virtually. Thank you all very much for participating. Thank you to both AAJA and NABJ for co-sponsoring the event this evening. And we hope you all have a pleasant evening. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks.